I was walking alongside the road at night from a party, ditched by my friend for a girl, when the car pulled up beside me. "Get in. Now!" I froze, totally taken by surprise, and he shouted again, this time saying, "Get inside or you're dead." The door swung open and I expected to be faced with a gun, but the man's hand rejoined the other on the wheel, leaving the open seat to me. Now, I didn't notice anything which could pose an immediate threat. He was buckled in, there was no weapon that I could see, and the road was bordered by trees. I could easily be well beyond the tree line before he even got out of the car. 2 years of track conditioning afforded me a certain proficiency at running, but in the half second that my brain ran through these observations and considerations, something else ran towards me. The sound of its bounding feet barely audible over the hum of the truck's engine. "Hurry!" Instinctively turning towards the approaching thing, I saw something terrible. Hunched, human in only the most general sense. A thing that would normally be bipedal was hunched over to run on all four of its limbs. I couldn't make out specifics of its appearance through the darkness, but realized with instant terror that it was completely silent. In this situation, you'd expect to hear some malicious snarling or perhaps even a raucous panting, considering the speed at which it approached, but the only sounds were its feet and hands slapping against the pavement. Just silently predatorial. Now, deeming the car the lesser of the two threats, I leapt inside and slammed the door. The driver took off without saying another word, and we sped down the road. Looking in the side view mirror, I saw the thing actually keeping up, managing to stay a few paces behind the car. Glancing at the speedometer, my jaw dropped as we climbed to 70 miles an hour. The thing that hounded us was preternaturally fast. As we reached 80, it barely lagged behind. I soon felt a discomfort in my rear and feared that I had possibly chosen an equally fatal alternative. That implanted in the seat was some sort of poisonous or anesthetizing needle, and I'd soon slip into death, or at least unconsciousness. The man's wide-eyed gaze was fixed on the road ahead. He paid no attention to me. I leaned forward and dislodged the object from the seat, bringing it to my face. I almost sighed in relief at seeing the little plastic army man, the bayonet being the thing that had poked me. Now, remembering the dire circumstances and seeing the still pursuing creature faintly behind us through the mirror, I asked the driver what it was that chased us. He wiped sweat and sweat-matted hair from his face, and after only a moment of shuddering, finally said, "My son." Now, I wanted to think that I hadn't heard him correctly, but the existence of the toy in the seat attested to his statement. Turning back to the mirror, I saw even though the creature was undeniably malformed, physically warped into some subhuman predator, it was still fairly small in stature, no bigger than the size of a child. Now, letting it all sink in, my mind instinctively reverted to performing the habitual behaviors of being in a car. I autonomously reached over to pull and buckle my seatbelt, but my hand brushed against shreds. The belt had been savagely torn. He did that when it happened. Sorry. The man's voice was hollow now, no longer urgent like it had been when he unceremoniously picked me up. We drove down a seemingly endless stretch of road, and I found myself growing increasingly thankful that he had come by. Even without the threat of the creature, the walk home would have been awful. Hoping that I wouldn't inspire some frenzied moment of despair, I asked the man what exactly had happened to his son. "We were just driving, coming home from his mother's. I get him Tuesday to Saturday. I really lucked out with that one. We had the windows down. The air conditioning in my car is busted right now, and he liked sticking his hand out as we drove. Anyway, about 10 miles back it happened. It just came out of nowhere. One second he was sitting there, his little hand waving along with the air current, and the next he was slapping at his neck, crying that something had stung him. I looked over and, God, it was huge, like a fat, prickly worm with wings. I know this will sound crazy, but it looked evil. Not just unsettling like spiders or something like that, but as if its sole purpose was to hurt people. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's the best way I can describe it. He pauses there and reaches down to his side to adjust something. I saw bloodstains on his clothing, and the rim of a gash glistening in the light from the moon. God, it looked terrible, but he didn't do anything else to suggest that it bothered him. He continued. After it stung him, he managed to rip it off and throw it out the window, but before I could even ask how he was feeling, he started to transform. I swear it was like his eyes melted out of their sockets. Everything just drooped, his nose, his mouth sagging until his face was just a lumpy surface. It was horrifying. To make it worse, he was screaming the whole time. That's when he started thrashing around, clawing at the upholstery and himself with knife-like nails that had grown in the span of a few seconds. He slashed in my direction, cutting me across the side, and I lost control of the car and slammed the brakes. Now, I know this will make me seem like an asshole or a really shitty dad, but I swear the thing beside me at that moment was no longer my son. There were other changes too. All of them happened so quickly, and I couldn't look at that thing without feeling anything other than revulsion. And in a moment of panic, I kicked it away from me as it turned, and thankfully the passenger door came open. It fell out, immediately sprang up, and would have hopped back in the car if I hadn't driven away the moment it was out. I saw it try to run, but apparently that wasn't efficient enough for it. So it got down on all fours and started coming after me like that. I came across you a few moments later. I listened to his story in silence, my blood growing colder with each sentence. I felt for the man, I really did, and I couldn't bring myself to blame him for abandoning that creature, that thing which was clearly no longer his son. I asked what he planned on doing, beyond just driving to safety, and he didn't respond. The shock most likely too great for him to even let him think of the immediate future. We maintained about 85, and even though the road was dark, I didn't dare ask him to slow down. I couldn't see the creature in the mirror anymore, but I doubted it had given up. We eventually came near to the intersection from which the road to my house could be taken. I told him this, and we slowed as we approached it. Despite him being a stranger, I felt he was harmless, and asked if he would drive me all the way home. He agreed, and as we turned, we passed the first car we'd seen that night. We must have looked strange. Faces set with expressions of fright, because the passengers, a family of 3, all looked at us with worry. If only they'd known to worry for themselves. Now, the man dropped me off, and I thanked him for the ride, saving my life, but he left without further conversation. Despite not having had to walk, I was still tired and went to sleep the moment I fell on my bed. And the next morning I went to a nearby diner for some breakfast, barely thinking about the night before. I knew it hadn't have been a nightmare. No dream could ever be so vivid, terrifying. I didn't want to have it at the forefront of my thoughts, not so early in the day. I was denied this peace of mind. As I waited for my food, I overheard 2 men talking in the booth ahead. Apparently, one was a trucker, and during his route he passed by emergency vehicles and a tow truck. He said that he saw them preparing to haul away a car, which, by the looks of it, had been all slashed up, and that 3 bodies were laying on the side of the road covered by tarp. I didn't speak up. I couldn't bring myself to even utter a word, but I knew The people he spoke about had been the family the stranger and I passed on the way to my home, and that the creature that had once been the stranger's son had gotten to that poor family.